Well, those of you who've been here in recent weeks will know that it was not too long ago when we preached on this passage. We took the opportunity to tell this beloved and familiar parable in a season when we were still in the sanctuary, because it seemed so important not to let it go to waste, as it were, and to speak the parable at a time when people are actively attending, and I think it was a youth Sunday. I mean, it made sense to do it then, and we did it, and we had arranged, as you see, to preach something else today, and yet here we are. And I felt after the process of this week, after the days of the news that I was reading, that somehow I needed this parable again. And somehow parables can be like that. They can be this word that we suddenly find that we need when circumstances remind us of what it is to go looking for a word from the Lord in due season. And so I found myself returning to this parable, technically assigned for today, but which we did a little bit earlier. It just goes to show you do not question God's timing on when parables are said in church, I suppose. But you know, I find myself tired. And I think many people do too. I know later today I'll get on the internet and I will look at what all of the other preachers in the country did in this hour of this service today, and I will find words that I wish I had said, insights that I wish I had been able to pull together and to offer us, to offer you, frankly, also to offer myself after what has been a long week, to put it mildly. Because the fact is, I don't really know what to say. And I don't know that anybody does, but gosh, I am eager to find out who it is who's out there who might have something to say. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, says that when we do not know how it is to pray, even to pray, the Spirit intercedes with us, for us, with sighs too deep for words. And I don't know about you, but I may not have the words right now, but boy, I have the sighs. And I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people do in this season. We just don't know what more words will do. Yet, I think we look around, even before this week, we knew we were entering a kind of mean season. And there were plenty of us, I'm sure each and every person in his or her own way, was troubled by the direction things seemed to be taking in a difficult spring and summer. We know that. So it's not as if the words were easy beforehand. Although, gosh, there have been a whole lot of words over the last few months. But you know, I think one of the great challenges of the words that we have heard has been that they have been words that have reinforced our sense of how we disagree, how we are separate, how we are locked in perspectives and points of view that point us in different directions. People have been so aware of the power of words in these months, but in the particular power of words to remind us of the tribes that we inhabit and all the ways that those tribes point us in different directions. And there is something tribal that seems to be coming into the world again just now. And that's why I think we need the story of the Good Samaritan. That's why I think we need this gospel this morning. That's why I think it reminds us that despite the challenges and the heartache and the lack of the right words, there is good news that we can proclaim. Good news we need to proclaim, especially now. Because what is the story about, really? The story's about tribes. Samaritans and Jews. The pure and the impure. The safe and the risky. The familiar and the unfamiliar. The story of the Good Samaritan is a story that's very much about tribes. You remember the story. A man goes down to Jericho. Jerusalem is very high up. And the road is steep and lined with caves, as I think I've told you before. And in those caves, notoriously, were robbers who were waiting for that person foolhardy enough to travel the road alone. And that's what happened to this man who we hear of at the beginning of the parable. He is traveling alone, and the robbers appear. And they rob him, they strip him, beat him up, and leave him for dead in a ditch. And this is where the story gets interesting. It gets interesting because, as I said, it's a story that's a story about tribes. And here's the funny thing. A priest comes by. And from what we can tell, he's the same tribe as the man in the ditch. But the man in the ditch doesn't have his New York Yankees t-shirt on just then. The man in the ditch doesn't have his "I've just been to the temple" sticker on his lapel. The man in the ditch doesn't have his American Express card, although, believe me, he did not leave home without it, but unfortunately someone liberated it. And so he cannot be identified securely, persuasively, as one of us. And so the prudent thing to do when we cannot confirm that he is one of us is just to assume that he must be one of them, whoever they are. So the priest hugs his shoulder of the road and continues to go up toward Jerusalem, where he will serve in God's temple. A Levite is next. Also someone associated with religious faith. And the same thing happens. This man in the ditch whose moans he hears, he cannot say, "Up, he's one of us," and so he says, "I can't confirm that this man is my neighbor." Because To be a neighbor in the eyes of the Levite, in the eyes of the priest, to be a neighbor means something rather specific. It means someone who is in my tribe, someone who might live next door in my village where we all know each other and we know where one another are from. We know what one another are capable of. We know that we are stuck together. That's what a neighbor was to the priest, to the Levite. And so, since this man does not have his key fob to let him in, he must not be a neighbor, or, well, it's better just to play it safe. But then the story changes, right? The story changes. Because someone else comes along. A Samaritan comes along, and he's not in that club. He's not that neighbor. Had it been he in the ditch, there would have been no question of stopping, nor frankly much of any expectation that someone might. But you see, the Samaritan has a different understanding of what it is to be a neighbor. And it is this that Jesus wants God's people to hear and to hold close to our hearts. Because what the Samaritan understands by neighbor is a much richer, a much more robust, a much more generous, and a much more loving way of understanding what it is to be a neighbor. Because to the Samaritan, to be a neighbor is to be a human, and to be a human being is to be a neighbor. It is to have the simple claim of being another soul out there on the road. And that's not something that needs proving with proper ID or the proper clothes or the right kind of car or driving in the right kind of neighborhood at the right kind of time or playing the right and proper role. It is this simple claim that to be human is to deserve care. To be human is to deserve love. And therefore the call of faithful people is simply to look out and see who needs helping and to offer it as best we can. The church at its greatest moments has done just that. You may be aware, I myself have never been to Jerusalem, but if you go now, you can visit the Holocaust Memorial, and as one of the components of that place, there is a remarkable garden called the Garden of the Righteous Gentiles. And in that garden at the Holocaust Memorial, they have planted trees, a symbol of renewal and life, in memory of those Christians in particular who helped God's chosen people in a time of tremendous, tremendous danger. In a time when they might have hidden, they might have pulled back, a time when many did just that. And yet there were those who were motivated by a love of humanity and a sense of neighbor and a sense of God that pushed them to something far more risky. And some of them lost their lives because of it. But they understood what it was to stand for what is right. And what is right is no simple thing. But it was fundamentally the proposition that we are all human and therefore we are all neighbors. And so today, it seems especially important for us as people of faith to hear that call again. It's especially important for us as people of faith to remember that violence is never the solution. It's important for us as people of faith to remember that the essence of peacemaking is to continue to love. Continue to love no matter how challenging it may be, no matter how dark it may appear. Nevertheless, to persist in this work of doing what is right in all the ways that we might, in all the ways that we can. In a time when so many are tempted just to burrow down and look away, we cannot do that. That's not what faith is. That's not what love of neighbor calls us to do. And boy, it's good news. It's good news. It's good news because it says to us that for all the fear that we may ourselves feel, for all the confusion that we may be experiencing, opening our hearts to remain loving, seeking a joyful path even in the darkness, nevertheless is not only permitted, it's required. And the goodness that we are capable of is profound. And the people who are grateful for that goodness are too numerous to mention. It's good news because in a time of confusion, we can go forward with purpose, forward with love, forward with commitment, forward with our faith that another and better day will come, and another and a better day will come. It will. It will. And I think if you search in your heart, you will know it. And so, people of faith, we are challenged in these days to act from that place. And not to give up. There are no words. There aren't. Maybe there don't have to be words. Maybe that's not what's needed. Because love is greater than words. Joy is greater than words. Hope is greater than words. Commitment is greater than words. Kindness is greater than words. But the vision of what will come that they all preach, each one, is unmistakable. Who then is our neighbor. You know. Go thou and do likewise.